Thank you. Fair warning, my dog, I closed the door to my office because my dog might want to come in and say hi, but once he's in, then everything's about him. So we'll just keep him out for this. While we're waiting, if anyone wants to submit their questions, there's the Q&A box down at the bottom. They'll show up there. I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat box, but if you have a specific question you want me to answer, just make sure you put it in the Q&A box. That's what I'll mostly be keeping my eyes on. Just another few seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, I say let's do it. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this Q&A. Basically, I'm just gonna give a brief introduction of myself, and then we're gonna jump right into your questions. We have max an hour on here, so I wanna make the most of it. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want. If we get to them, awesome. If you guys just have a couple questions, we don't need to take the full hour. This is really whatever you guys make it. So, all right, a bit about me. My name is Ciara Duggan, as I'm sure you all know. My debut young adult fantasy novel, Awakened, was published in September by the Parliament House Press, and they're a small independent publishing company. I also run my own editorial business, Ciara Duggan Editorial, where I help writers with their manuscripts or their screenplays. If they have just a story idea and they want help brainstorming, and all the submission materials. If you're a writer who's ready to query, I help with query letters, synopsis, your first chapter, all that stuff. I am also an editor for Book Pipeline's evaluation service, and I act as a judge for their unpublished writing contest and their adaptation writing contest. So yeah, that's generally me. If you have any questions about my background or how I got started, again, the chat box, the Q&A box is where you can write those. And I see that a few are already coming in. So I'm just gonna get started. All right, so the first question is, do you remember the first time you picked up a pen or laptop to start writing a story? I'm pretty sure the first time I tried to write a story was before I could actually like string sentences together. I tried to draw picture books, which is basically just illegible drawings that I don't even remember doing. My parents just kept them and showed them to me. The first time I legitimately was like, hey, what if I could be a writer? It was probably, other than just writing assignments in middle school, high school, it probably wasn't until my later years in undergrad where I was like, you know what, I really like screenwriting. I was a theater minor. I really love theater. I always grew up in theater. And I got into playwriting. And that was probably the first time I was like, wow, maybe I can, you know, write my own story. The first time I actually wanted and tried to write a book wasn't until the year after I graduated college. For some reason growing up, I loved reading, I loved movies, but for some reason it never clicked with me that that was something you could actually do. So yeah, I'd say the first novel I ever wrote, which was terrible, was the year after I graduated college, which was in 2013. So started writing it in 2013 and probably didn't finish it till beginning of 2014. So it was terrible, never went anywhere, never saw the light of day. And it was in that time that I applied for my MFA in screenwriting. So yeah, cool. All right, so let's see. The next question is, oh, I think I just signed. Okay, what are your writing plans for 2022? Well, I have a couple things going on. I can't talk about all of them, but a big thing that's happening for me is my book Awakened is going to be translated into Italian, and I think they might want to do some editing process. So I'm going to be working with them on editing that book further, which is a bit strange since it's already been published, but so that's a big one for me. I'm currently working on a new book, which is exciting. It's very early stages. I'm probably only 10,000 words in, but it's completely outlined. And that is a young adult thriller, which is a little bit of a departure from young adult fantasy, paranormal, which I wrote previously. And then I'm also in the process of pitching a few screenplays with different production companies, which is exciting. Let's see. And I also have another book on submission with a couple other publishers. So yeah, I feel like I'm balancing a couple different things, and a lot of it is sort of a wait and see. But, you know, waiting and seeing is something you really get used to when you want to be a writer. So, all right, let's see. Okay, so the next question is, what does your writing process look like? All right, so I could probably, we only have an hour, so I'll try to keep it short. But basically, you know, it varies from story to story, but for the most part, an idea will come to me at some point or another, usually when I'm going for a run, or if I'm in the shower, sometime when I just least expect it. And it's more of like, oh, that's interesting. Let's see if it sticks. And if I'm still thinking about that idea a few days later, a few weeks later, can't get it out of my head, then I'm like, all right, there might be something to this. I should give it a shot and see if I can make anything out of it. And that's when I sort of just take a notebook or just type something out on my computer where I ask myself basic story questions of, who is this protagonist I'm thinking of? Who is this? What is this concept? Usually it's a concept that comes first. And then I fill in the blanks with the characters and how the characters fit into it. And so I sort of just write down all my thoughts. And then once I feel like, all right, I think I can take a real go at this, I do an outline. I cannot be a pantser. I need to know where I'm going, what's happening in the story. Otherwise, I just lose momentum. I lose interest. If I come to a point where I get stuck in drafting, then I'm just like, no, I can't keep going. It's gone, it's done. And so this is why me outlining everything before I actually start the drafting process is so important for me. And so I outline everything, act 1, act 2, act 3, and then once I feel comfortable with that outline, and I know that I give myself the grace to stray from that outline. If while I'm writing, I think of something else or realize I need a new character or something else might be more exciting than what I previously had in my outline, I'll let myself stray from that. And then I rework as I go. But as long as I have a general idea of the overall arc of the story, then I can get into drafting. Drafting usually takes me, in general, 3 to 4 months, especially if I have a full outline. I'll usually try to do, if I have a good rhythm going with writing, I'll try to do between 1,000, 1,500 words a day. I don't always hold myself to word counts, especially if I'm tackling a really difficult part of a story. I just, let myself get through it. And if I find a natural stopping point, then I'll stop. I'm not going to beat my head up against a wall if I'm stuck and not getting something, because that's just not productive. So yeah, it usually takes me between 3 and 4 months to draft. And then I like to give myself a couple weeks away from it. During this time, I can send it off to some other people to read it and get their thoughts on it. But usually I go back to editing it before I get feedback from other people, because I don't expect people to read my book within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. It's a lot to ask. So yeah, so then I go back to edit, and that usually is 3 to 4 weeks that I do that. I make sure I read everything out loud. The editing process for me can be a bit longer once I do get feedback on it. And if there's a big edit needed, then I need to, go in and do more work on it. If not, that's when I sort of get ready to send it off. So, all right, I think that was my writing process. Let me see what I've done. All right, up next. What is the most satisfying part of being a writer? I think there is this moment where I think I decide to commit to a story that is really exciting and really kind of terrifying. But, it's when like I said, during my writing process is I do a bit of a brain dump. And there's usually this point where I'm like, okay, I can see this novel. I can see this story. I can see the characters. I know what they want. I know what obstacles get in their way. I know what's at stake, and I'm excited about it. And I think I've had stories too where I do the outline for it and everything is working, but I'm just not excited. I'm not enthused. And if I'm not feeling that like itch to start drafting it, then I know I'm going to waste my time, because if I'm not excited about it from the onset, how am I supposed to keep going and keep writing this story for 3 to 4 months if from the very beginning I'm like, yeah, it's all right, like I'm sure it'll work, but because I feel like your excitement and your enthusiasm for a story comes through on the page as well. So if I'm not excited, the writing probably won't be exciting. The writing's not going to be great. So I think the most satisfying part is when you actually do your brain dump, do your outline, and you're like, oh my God, this is good. I feel good about it. I'm excited. I get way ahead of myself and I'm like, oh my God, like this is going to be published. People are going to love this, and that's fine. It's good to get excited about your own work, because if you're not excited about it, then no one else will. So yeah, definitely. I think the spark of I'm going to write this story and committing to it and being excited and then getting to explore it as you write. All right, so let's see what I've done. Are you a plotter or pantser? I touched upon this. I am definitely a plotter. I kind of like to say that I'm a bit of a mix, because I do let myself stray from my outline. But like I said before, if I don't have an outline, that baby's not getting finished. So, all right. And I envy those who are pantsers and can just see it all and can fly by the seat of their pants and come up with a really compelling, cohesive story, because that is talent I don't possess. All right. What's your advice for working with an indie publisher? I think the biggest, at least from my perspective, working with an indie publisher is make sure, and this really goes for working with any publisher, is to advocate for yourself, and to ask questions too. If you're first offered, we want an indie publisher is like, we want to publish your book. That's amazing. I didn't really know much about indie publishers at the time. So when I got my offer, I wanted to make sure I asked a ton of questions of, what the marketing would look like. Where would my book be? Would it be pay to order? Would they bulk order or bulk sell? What were their plans for my book? All that stuff. And I think it's important to ask those questions, because indie publishers don't often have as many resources as, say, larger traditional publishing houses have. And so sort of knowing what you're getting into, knowing how much work you're going to have to bring to the table is really important. And an experience I had with my indie publisher was, because they have limited resources, they have some of their own in-house editors, but they also contract out editors to work for them, to work with their authors, because they're a small operation and they can't all have their hands on every single book that they're publishing. And so my first round of edits with my indie publisher was with a contracted editor. And this was my first book being published. I had never gone through this process before. And I was really surprised at kind of the standard of editing I was getting from this first editor. And a lot of the comments on it were sort of amateurish, or it was very clear that they weren't reading my book carefully. They were asking me questions saying, oh, you need to introduce this earlier, even though it had already been introduced. They were missing character names. It was just very clear that they hadn't read my book careful enough, especially for the standard an editor should know your book, especially if they're giving you feedback on how to improve it. So I was really nervous that I had gotten myself into something terrible, but I had to advocate for myself. So I went back to the publisher. I showed some of the comments and, in my opinion, mistakes that this editor made, and they were just as shocked as I was. They're a small operation. They can't oversee everything. So they actually depend on the authors to give feedback, to work with the authors more closely. And so by me saying that I feel like this editor isn't right for my book, I don't know if they took great care with it. And when they looked over her notes, they actually agreed with me, and they gave me a new editor who was wonderful, fantastic. From there on, I had a great experience with the following editors I worked with through that publishing house. So I guess that was a long-winded way for me to say, to advocate for yourself, and especially with an indie publisher, know that it's and probably with most publishers, but in my experience with the indie publisher, it's going to be a much more collaborative process, which I personally love. So let me mark that as done. Get a sip of water. It's interesting. I feel like I'm talking to myself because I can't see you guys, but I know you're there. So thanks for bearing with me. All right. What is your revision process like once you've finished a first draft? Okay. So usually, and I recommend everyone do this, while I'm writing my first draft, I keep a notebook with me, and because there's so much to keep track of while you're writing your first draft, especially if you have somewhat of a complicated plot or you have a lot of characters. Basically, if you're writing a full novel, there's going to be a lot of moving parts, a lot to keep track of. And there's times I show up to the page and I can't remember what I wrote a month ago, and I'm like, oh, like what was that plot point? What did that character say? Was this aspect introduced already? Wasn't it introduced? So I make sure I take notes while I'm drafting, and be like, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, don't forget this, don't forget that, because I will reference those later in my drafting process. And then once I finally finish, I'll have that list of things to keep track of when I go back through my editing process. So those are things I make sure I look for. I'll usually do those first rather than starting at the top of my book and editing down. I'll look at that list of questions, and I'll go through the book and make sure that I'm answering those questions, or all the little aspects and things that need to tie together are being adhered to. And then once I feel like, all right, I don't think there's any loose threads, I feel like everything's working, that's when I'll go back to the top and I'll read through my novel. And I read it out loud. It drives my husband crazy, but I'll read it out loud because, when I'm typing everything out, it might sound fine when I'm reading it, but when I read it aloud, I'm like, wow, people don't sound like that. Like, that's a terrible line of dialogue, or a sentence might sound really awkward, or, it might feel really wordy as I'm trying to read it out. And so I go through and I just try to smooth everything out once I'm reading it out loud. I do that for the whole manuscript. And while I'm doing that, I might find other issues with the story or the structure, or have other ideas bring into my head. So I make sure I take notes during my editing process as well. Once I finally read through the entire manuscript, that's when I reference the notes I took while I was editing, go back in, implement anything I need. And that's usually as far as I go before I send it out to other people to read or to put it on submission. I have definitely been one of those writers, especially earlier in my career, where I was way too anxious to get my book out. And so I finished the draft and I was like, you know what, I think it's fine. Let's get it out there. And I don't recommend doing that, because you get one shot with these agents, these publishers, and you want your book to be in the best shape they can be. So it can be, sorry, I'm a writer. You want your book to be in the best shape it can be, so that whoever you're sending it to, an agent, a publisher, an editor, that you're making their life easier. They don't want to take on a book that needs a ton of work. There are definitely authors and editors out there who will see so much potential in a book, even though it needs a lot of work, they'll want to take it on. And there's also agents and editors who, well, especially there's some agents out there who, if they have a specific vision for a book, they might try to edit it with you and work on it with you, which is awesome. But these people also have other clients, other books they're working on. So you really don't want your book to have too much work to be reworked, because you'll either just get a rejection, or you have a really heavy editing process ahead of you. So just make sure your manuscript is in the best shape. And yeah, I guess that answered that question. That was long-winded. I'm long-winded. I'm sorry. All right, so I'll take another sip. All right, this next question is, can you tell us about the new book you're writing? Anything about the plot? So as a rule, I don't generally talk about what I'm writing until it's done. I can give general information. It is a young adult thriller and it's very different for me, because I'm used to writing in the fantasy world and paranormal world. So this is the first young adult book I'm writing that there is no magic. There are no weird magical creatures or supernatural creatures. It is about a girl in high school who struggles with body image, and she's kidnapped. And when she comes back, I don't want to say too much, but basically, at first she thinks this kidnapping has had a wonderful effect on her life, and she's transformed as a person, which is a bit strange after you've been kidnapped. She obviously still has struggles, but then obviously she realizes that things aren't as great as they seem. Her kidnapper is still at large, and there are a lot of other things that go into it. It is a bit twisty and thrillery, and there's a lot of familial dynamics that go into the story. So that's all I'm going to say about that, but I'm really excited about it. It's a challenge for me. It's completely different from anything I've ever written before. So I was very scared to start writing it, but I did start drafting, and I'm having a lot of fun. And I think it's important to challenge yourself as a writer, because you're never done growing. I feel like I still have so much to learn, and it's so important to stay open while you're still writing, even if you have books published, even if you have movies made, you're never done learning. So, all right. How did you pick a good editor? Oh, how do you pick a good editor? So I think ask questions, if you're looking to get your book professionally edited outside of a publisher or agent, if you get a book deal, or they will assign it to an editor. You don't really get to pick it. But if you're looking at different freelance editors or people who have their own companies, make sure you ask the important questions. Look and make sure that they have writing credentials. Unfortunately, it's not a field where you need to like sit an exam or get qualifications for it. So anyone could really start a website and be like, I'm a book editor, pay me money and I'll edit your book. So make sure that they have some sort of credentials, they have experience, they've been doing this a while, they know what they're talking about. And also, even if there is a really experienced editor, they might not be a great match for you. You want to ask questions about what their working style is, what their timeline is, how do they give feedback, and also make sure you're getting the kind of feedback you want. If you want developmental edits, make sure you're asking, saying like, I want you to read my story and give me story notes. I want to make sure everything is working, that the stakes are high enough, that there's tension, that the characters are well developed. Know what you're looking for, because you might, an editor might take a book and just think that you want proofreading or you want line edits, and not do the in-depth kind of edit you want. So I think know kind of what you're looking for, and ask those questions to make sure you guys are compatible. Ask what the process will look like. Is it going to be a one-time edit? Is it going to be a collaborative effort where you go through a few rounds of edits? And eventually you'll find someone that meets your expectations and matches up with what you're looking for. So yeah, just make sure you ask your questions and make sure that they actually know what they're doing. Okay, let's see. What are your favorite writing craft resources? So I actually love attending things like this. If there's author Q&As, or even if you follow certain authors on Instagram or Twitter, a lot of them just sort of in their stories or on their social media will share their their experiences, how they write, what they like to do. I also love, just writing craft books. I have a few behind me right here. I have Save the Cat. I also have Save the Cat Writes a Novel. There's a couple others. Stephen King's On Writing is really good. I also just finished another audiobook, but I can't remember the name of it. And a lot of these books say the same things, but I think hearing it over and over again really kind of hits home of what it takes to write a really compelling, cohesive story, how to create amazing characters. So yeah, and also just I find that the writing community on social media, I'm on Instagram a lot, and I find that the writing community is really supportive and people love talking about their experiences and what they're writing and how they're writing. So, basically whatever you can get your hands on. There's also a ton of information online. Just again, make sure that what you're looking at, they're like reputable sources. So, okay. Let's see. How challenging was it to write a book that delved into difficult subjects like kidnapping? Did you have to be mindful of trigger warnings or other people's real life experiences? So I'm currently writing that book. I have not finished it yet. I'm only about 10,000 words in, but it's definitely something I've done a lot of research on. I've watched interviews with people. I don't personally know anyone who has been kidnapped, so obviously it's a struggle for me. It's so important to be sensitive to those who have experienced that. And, I know when this book is ready to be taken out, I'm going to be putting trigger warnings into my query letter, my synopsis, letting people know that this is the subject matter this book deals with. So, because if someone doesn't want to read that and they get triggered by it and they're uncomfortable with it, I'm 100% okay for them to be like, nope, not for me. Great. I know my book is not going to be for everyone. And that goes for any story. You never want anyone to feel uncomfortable or surprised or shocked by something you're reading, but it's also one of those things where there's so much media out there, it's something people are going to come across. So it's just, yeah, it's just a matter of being mindful. And as I write this book, I'm definitely looking at the different psychological effects that this would have on a character, and also just research in general about these things. They say write what you know, but that can be limiting. I've never been kidnapped, but I'm really interested in kind of the psychological effects that might have on someone, and the kind of different reactions people have to it. And PTSD was actually a theme in the book I just published. So it's something that really interests me. But obviously it's so important to do your research and make sure that how you're having your characters react to these situations are realistic, because otherwise they won't be multidimensional characters. They'll appear very static and unrealistic. And so I'm definitely taking care to make sure, I'm making sure that it's realistic, and I'm doing my research, and I also want to do it justice. I don't want anyone to ever read this book and just be like, that's so off base. You want all your stories to be as realistic as possible and sensitive as well. I'm not afraid to get into hard, gritty realities in stories, because they happen, and even though it might be uncomfortable subject matter, I still think it's important to explore that subject matter. So yeah, I think that answers that question. It's definitely challenging, but you got to make sure you do your homework for sure. All right. Okay, it looks like we have one question left in the box, so I'll answer this, or feel free to write some more questions. So, all right. What writing conferences, competitions, nonprofits besides this one would you recommend? So I am a bit biased because I do work for one of the competitions. Book Pipeline is kind of a branch of Script Pipeline, where they have an unpublished contest and an adaptation contest. So the unpublished one is for unpublished writers. And I can speak from experience because I submitted to this contest, and this is how I got working with them, because my unpublished manuscript was a finalist for one of their my unpublished manuscript was a finalist for one of their categories. And basically you submit, and then if you're a finalist, if you're a winner, you get money, which is nice, but you also, if you're a finalist, you get your book taken out to their contacts of agents, publishers, and all that stuff. So I think any competition or contest that is just like, we'll pay you, I mean, that's great. If you want to make money, that's awesome. But I think the real benefit of those contests is getting your name out there, getting your material in front of people who are actually in the business, agents, editors, other publishing companies. And so I think Book Pipeline is great. They also do an adaptation contest, which is for published authors. It can be, traditionally published, self-published, independently published, where you submit and they basically see if there is a book that they think would be good to be adapted into film. And so then they'll shop your book to the film side of the industry, which is pretty cool. So I'm a judge for both of those. And now having submitted to it and now being on the other side of that competition, it's really cool to see how it all works. And there's a lot of judges, and it's nice because a lot of eyes get on the material. It's not just, it makes it less subjective when multiple people think something has potential and moves on into the contest. And then they also do the workshop, which I'm an editor for, which is basically you submit your synopsis and first 5,000 words, and would basically give you feedback for it. But there are a lot of those are the contests I'm most familiar with. There's also some screenwriting contests that I'm familiar with. I know Writer's Digest does a lot of short story contests. I would just make sure if you're submitting to a contest, you make sure it's reputable. Make sure that they have a track record. I'd be wary of submitting to any really brand new contest or anything like that. And not really a contest, but there are these pitching events for Pit Mad, Pit Dark, all those Twitter ones. Pitch Wars is, if you get selected, you basically go through a mentorship process that ends in an agent showcase, which is pretty cool. So you can find all of these resources, especially if you're active in the writing community. On social media, I follow #writing community and #mwriting, and I find that there's a lot of great resources there. All right, what are your tips for selling your book? So, my experience has been with an indie publisher, so they have done some marketing for me. But because they're not one of the large traditional publishing houses, they have less resources, and so I have had to do a lot of my own kind of marketing for my book to be sold. And that for me, I don't have many resources either. So for me, it was about building building my social media presence, getting the word out there about my book, doing events like this, really just doing giveaways, doing what you can just to get your book out there. If you're self-publishing, I know that there's different marketing companies you can go help market your book. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different avenues to get your book sold. The traditional route is to go through a publisher and they will help with marketing and distribution. If you're self-publishing, I'm not as familiar with self-publishing, but I'm sure that there's a lot of different resources and different companies you can work with to help get your book out there, especially if you do it through Amazon and all those other online booksellers. All right, let's see. Do you have any social media advice for authors and writers? I think going from, sorry, my mouth is getting so dry. Going from someone who was really just a lurker, a social media lurker who followed a lot of authors and writers, to now being an author who has to do social media. I think what I like to see from other authors and what I've gotten feedback on of what people like to see from me is really just being authentic in what kind of stories you like to tell, what your writing process is like. A lot of people kind of like a sneak peek into your day of how you write, what your workspace looks like, what you're reading, what resources you utilize. And so I think just being transparent of everything writing you have going on is always a great idea. It's also, in order to get more followers honestly, I don't put that much stock in how many followers you have. It's kind of how you engage with your following or engage with other writers or engage with readers. And so I think just making sure you're responding to comments and you're answering those DMs and, you're getting people excited for the work you're putting out. I would definitely talk about what you're working on, what's coming up next, because then this keeps people coming back to you. But also just being really active in, finding and being an active participant in the writing community on social media, I think is really important. And I think sometimes social media can be such a toxic environment for different things, but I find for the most part that the writing community is so supportive, is so interested in what everyone's working on and how people write and what people are reading and what everyone thought about it, at least in my experience. Especially, I know Twitter, I feel like can be kind of a brutal place to go But I find that the writing community on Twitter, again, is really supportive and fun. And, you know, it's just a bunch of nerds who want to talk about writing, which is awesome. So find your nerds. That's my advice. Okay, let's see. And this question is, what advice do you have for querying, writing a good synopsis, query letter, first chapter, finding agents? We have 20 minutes left. I could spend an hour talking about this. I think when you're ready to write your query letter, you should know your book so well that writing it, you should know it so well that you don't have to really reference things too much. You should be able to write your query letter as if you're excitedly telling your best friend what it's about and wanting to pique their interest. So I think, there's tons of resources on how to write a query letter, how to write a synopsis. But I think the most important thing while you're writing your query letter is to remember these questions. Who is your protagonist? What is your protagonist's desire? What obstacles get in the way of this desire? What is at stake if your protagonist fails? And yeah, that's about where the query letter can end. For the synopsis, take it further. So what's at stake if your protagonist fails? What is the climax of the story? What is the resolution of the story? How does everything resolve? And how has your protagonist transformed from the beginning of the book? How have they changed? How have they grown? This part is really important because that typically dictates what the story is about. That's, the theme that's explored, what you want, what message you want your reader to take away from your story. It kind of gives the big picture of what your story's about. So if you keep those in mind while you're writing, because it's a limited amount of space, you don't have the allowance to go into every little side story, every little character, every little subplot. You have to stick to sort of your main character and their story arc and character arc. And also make sure you are you don't forget about their emotional arc, because a lot of times, why we like characters is because they're emotional, because they're human, because they're flawed. And if you write your synopsis, if you write your query, just saying this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, that's important. But if there's no emotional arc and saying this is how this character felt about this is how, like, this character was angry because of this, blah, 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 and showing how they grew and showing how they transformed, that is what will really draw a reader in, because a reader needs to sympathize or empathize with the protagonist in order to fully be able to invest themselves in this story. So yeah, let's see what else there was. First chapter, don't overload with exposition. I feel like, I know I do this, is that so often I want to get everything out onto the page, and you can do that in kind of a vomit draft. But know that your reader will stick with you if they're intrigued enough, and you can give that backstory and exposition later. If you overload your first chapter with exposition, it's you won't grab your reader. How is someone supposed to care about all of your main character's history if they don't if they're not initially able to sympathize or empathize with them within that first chapter? Adrienne Young actually does I think she has a post. I'll see if I can find it. She talks about the first chapter. I think it might have been a live conversation on her Instagram where she talks about the first chapter, and it was a wonderful resource. Adrienne Young in general is a great resource for these kinds of writing tips and writing process as well. Finding agents. So if you can, I say do Publishers Marketplace, but it is a bit expensive. I think it's $20 or $25 a month. But basically that basically is a database that has all the agents, their sales track record, who they represent, all that stuff. So that's a really good reference. And also, if you're in the querying trenches, I would recommend Query Tracker to use to track all your queries, because you can also find agents there as well and do the filter of, you know, who this agent is, what they're looking for, who they represent. And then you can track your progress of like, I've submitted to this agent requested the full manuscript. So that's really helpful. You could also just use a spreadsheet, but I find that Query Tracker is a really great resource. And make sure you're actually submitting to agents that you feel like you'd work well with. Try not to go down the rabbit hole of just wanting an agent for the sake of having an agent. You know, especially if you've queried a bunch of different agents and you haven't been successful, don't just settle for any old agent because they want your manuscript. You know, make sure you ask those important questions, make sure they have contacts in the publishing industry, make sure that you'll be a good fit, make sure your communication styles match up and that they believe in your book. I've had agents who wanted to represent me, but then in the same breath, they're saying, you know, paranormal, not really my thing, but we can work on it. I'm like, well, I write paranormal and I write young adult. If that's not your thing, why do you want to represent me and my writing, my book? So just make sure that it's a good fit, because if it's not, the relationship probably won't work out. All right. So I've just answered all of the questions, it looks like. If anyone else has last minute questions, we're about nearly out of time. If you have any last minute questions, be sure to put them in the box. Otherwise, I did on my social media, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but I did promise a giveaway. So I do have this handy dandy book here. And before this, I put all the participants into one of those little spinning wheel things and it automatically selected. And because everyone didn't show up, I think I had about 20 signups and it looks like there's only 6 people here. I picked 5 people to win and it looks like 1 person is here and that person is Susan. So Susan, I'm going to send you an email and I am going to get your mailing information and I'm going to put this in the post to you. So congratulations. It was completely random. I'm going to be doing giveaways on my social media too. So make sure you follow me. I'm at Duggan Books on Instagram, Twitter, Ciara Duggan Books on TikTok. I'm really bad at TikTok. So if you follow me on there, I apologize. But my publisher wanted me to get on there, so I'm there. But I'm going to be doing more giveaways of my book. I'm going to be doing some query evaluation giveaways. So make sure you look out for those. And oh, it looks like we have one more question. What did it feel like when you finally published your first book? Oh, I actually have a TikTok video of this when I got my first copy of my book in the mail, and I was very posed for the video. I was like, oh, this is lovely. And then as soon as I stopped the video, I cried because it's been a long journey and it really felt amazing to hold my book for the first time. When I first got the offer to be published and I signed the contract, I think I was a bit numb. I don't think I fully drank in the moment. I think it was sort of like, okay, cool, check it off the list. On to editing. You know, we gotta keep editing. I definitely am that kind of person who is always on to the next, look forward, work on the next project. And I sometimes have difficulty living in the moment and recognizing those big accomplishments. But in retrospect, I go back and I'm like, that was pretty good. Good job. Give myself a little pat on the back, have a glass of champagne and cry. I cry at everything, so it's okay. Oh, it looks like we got another one. What kept you writing in that long space from when you started writing before you got published? I didn't feel like I was good at anything else. I think I just loved writing. I love stories. I definitely had those thoughts of like, well, what's the point? You know, it was probably 3 years of me writing seriously before I got represented or before I got this publishing deal. I actually had an agent before I got the publishing deal, and it didn't work out. Our professional standards did not match up, and so I parted ways with her. And it was after that that I got my publishing deal, and you know, that was a hard moment. I sort of felt like I got the agent, now I don't have the agent. All is lost. What's the point? You know, I cried some more, got upset, but it was one of those, it's one of those things where there's nothing else I want to do. So, you know, you in this industry, you get a thick skin really quickly. And you just, even if I quit, I would still have these story ideas coming into my head. So there's nothing else to do with them except to write them. So I definitely have other hobbies outside of writing and stuff like that, but it's just what I want to do. And I'm a very determined person who was raised to persevere. So perseverance, that's something else. Thick skin and perseverance is something, if you seriously want to get into this business, is something you will need to adapt to. But yeah, alrighty. I hope that answered your question. I want to thank you all so much for coming. This was awesome. If you guys think of any more questions after this is over, feel free to DM me on Instagram. Again, I'm at Duggan Books on Instagram. That's where I live mostly. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk with writers, help writers. If you're in need of any editing services, feel free to check out my website, which is kiradugganeditorial.com. And yeah, there's so many other fun workshops and other author Q&As that I hope you guys go check out through Indie WriterFest as well. So yeah, this was awesome. This was a lot of fun. So thank you guys so much. Susan, I'll be emailing you. Yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Thank you.